Hi there, everybody. I know that some of you waited for this for a long time, so we're continuing with the Napoleonic Wars from Epic History TV, and we're now at the battleground France in 1814. So after the Battle of Leipzig, the Battle of the Nations, and we all know why it's the name of that battle, because it was a multinational, multi-ethnical battle, which ended up in Napoleon's defeat, and it kind of paved the way into Napoleon's defeat and for the Allies to advance into France itself, which would shape the face of Europe in the future. But okay, without further ado, the original link is in the description below. I'm gonna give my thoughts, opinion, and so on. If you want to correct me, add something, please do it in the comment section below. And I put the mic a little bit nearer to my face, maybe the quality is then better. Okay, let's see. Peace, peace. It's always enough to say the word. Am I to give up all that I possess in l'Allemand?
In October 1813, Napoleon had suffered his heaviest ever defeat at Leipzig,
The
Battle of the Nations.
Yes, it was.
Surviving French forces, exhausted, sick and demoralized, retreated to the River Rhine and prepared to defend France from invasion. But in November, the armies of the Sixth Coalition paused their advance, and Austrian Foreign Minister Metternich offered peace terms. The Frankfurt proposals would allow Napoleon to keep his throne if France returned to her so-called natural frontiers.
Okay, at that time, after the Battle of the Nations, we had the Confederation of the Rhine, but it was dissolved, and it served as a buffer between the French mainland and the other allies. And at that point of time, a lot of the prior German allies that the French had, like Bavaria, Württemberg, they lost them and they joined the Allies. We will also see that one of Napoleon's closest allies, or a person that was with him throughout the whole war, betrayed him with the kingdom of Naples in Italy. But we will see that Napoleon will give the Allies a real fight. So he won't just surrender, or the Allies wouldn't have a easy time in France. And with Metternich, Metternich was the foreign minister of the Austrian Empire, yes. In around 1810, his reputation got, I cannot remember why, but his reputation got hit. But after that, he was the main figure, not only in the foreign affairs of the Austrian Empire, but throughout Europe. He was known as a versatile and pretty effective diplomat, and he would serve until the revolutionary year of 1848. So what, like 30-40 years he was in service. So that shows you his capacity. But Metternich and a lot of the European powers like Great Britain, Spain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia, they wanted to reinstate Europe to the picture that was prior, before Napoleon went on his conquest of Europe.
It was the best offer Napoleon was likely to get.
So prior to the beginning of the war.
Was to the wall, and all Europe's great powers were united against him.
Yeah, true.
Even so, he did not accept the terms. He merely agreed to reopen negotiations. To the Allies, and many in France itself, it proved that Napoleon would not listen to reason.
That's a nice picture. What, Spain, Württemberg, Holland, Polen, Hamburg, Moscow, Brandenburg, Preußen. Cool picture.
The war went on, and by January 1814, Napoleon's situation looked even worse. Many of his besieged garrisons in the east were starved into surrender.
Yeah.
Marshal Davout, with 34,000 men in Hamburg, was now besieged. Denmark, one of France's last allies, was invaded by Bernadotte's Swedish army and made to join the coalition. French troops evacuated the Netherlands, which reasserted its independence, after nearly 20 years of French control.
Yeah, but they had a strong...
In Italy, Eugene's army faced a new enemy. Joachim Murat, King of Naples, now marching north with 30,000 men to honor his new alliance with the Sixth Coalition.
Just imagine the psychological hit. You had Murat, who was, like for years and years, he saved your ass multiple times in battle, and now he switched sides. I think that was also, hit Napoleon on a psychological, personal level.
In Paris, Napoleon...
Regarding the Netherlands, they went back into, not like neutrality, but the French had a firm grip on the Belgium lands. Especially, they had big influence in a Belgian region called Flanders, where there are a lot of French-speaking people. But eventually, after Napoleon rejects the first offer to go back to those bigger parts, which he also conquered, including Belgium, the Allies will eventually give him another peace treaty, but without Belgium, which he would also not accept.
Responded to the crisis with a series of extreme measures. Property taxes doubled, state salaries and pensions suspended, 300,000 new conscripts called up, from a country already exhausted by 20 years of war.
Yeah, that's just too much.
He ordered the release of Pope Pius, under French house arrest for the last 5 years, to try to shore up his support in Italy. He even agreed to release Fernando, the Bourbon King of Spain, to take up his throne in exchange for peace between France and Spain, a condition that Fernando was in no position to honor.
Yeah, and they already lost the guerrilla war in Spain.
But these concessions were too little, far too late. In January, 2 coalition armies crossed the Rhine into France. Blücher's army of Silesia and Schwarzenberg's army of Bohemia. Outnumbered French forces in their path could only fall back. On the 25th of January, Napoleon said farewell to his wife and son at the Tuileries Palace, before leaving for the front. He would never see either of them again.
Really?
With just 70,000 men, he faced odds of 4-1. Most of his troops were raw conscripts, some without uniforms, many just learning how to hold a musket.
Wasn't Marie-Louise allowed to retreat with him to Elba? Didn't know that. I didn't know that.
But for the first time in years, Napoleon's army was so small that he'd be able to exercise direct command over all its movements. The result would be one of the most audacious and brilliant campaigns in history. Imagine Napoleon waging war in the 20th century. His cavalry replaced by armored vehicles.
Yeah, a lot of people think that the Battle of the Nations was a big one, where Napoleon lost a lot of his remaining experienced troops, and it was a big moral hit on the French population itself. But, as you're probably going to see, he's probably going to mention a lot of the battles. I definitely don't know all the details of all the small skirmishes and battle that happened there, but I know that Napoleon gave the Allies a lot of problems in France, and he made a lot of remarkable strategical moves that catch the Allied 1,000 times, like unprepared, and he's probably going to go deep into it. So he didn't just give up France, or it wasn't an easy task for the Allies, although they had more manpower to spare, more materials, like to throw at him, shells and ammunition and so on.
The battle for France would be fought east of Paris, mostly across Champagne, a flat region divided by the rivers Marne and Seine and their tributaries. In late January, fields were dusted with snow, and roads quickly turned to mud. Napoleon learned that the coalition armies were widely scattered. with part of Blücher's army near Napoleon's old college at Brienne. The Emperor advanced rapidly, hoping to trap and destroy part of Blücher's army. But after a hard day's fighting that cost both sides 3,000 casualties, Blücher was able to retreat towards Schwarzenberg's army. That evening, Napoleon was nearly skewered by a charging Cossack, saved only by General Gorgo's
Always the Cossacks. The Cossacks, the most efficient part of
As
the
Napoleon
units
tried to work out the
of the
enemy's
Allies.
movements, Blücher, heavily reinforced by Schwarzenberg, made a surprise attack at La Rothière. Allied troops advanced through swirling snow to assault the village, defiantly held by young French conscripts. One was so inexperienced that Marshal Marmont had to personally show him how to load his musket during the battle.
Right.
By late afternoon, Raeder's Bavarian corps was falling on Napoleon's flank. Heavily outnumbered, Napoleon had no option but to retreat, having lost 5,000 casualties and 73 guns abandoned in the thick mud. The Allies' frontal attacks meant their losses were greater, but by combining their armies, they defeated Napoleon on French soil for the first time.
Yeah,
Believing Napoleon would now retreat towards Paris,
they have more men to spare.
the Allies decided to advance along two routes to ease pressure on the roads. Blücher would take a northern route along the Marne. Schwarzenberg would follow the Seine. But dividing their armies again would play right into Napoleon's hands.
I also don't think that that's a good idea. Because what was one of the main tactics of Napoleon? He would split the enemy army in smaller fractions and then attack the smaller fractions
After 2 days
before
to
facing
reorganize, Napoleon
whole army,
continued his retreat to
the bigger
Nogent,
parts of the army.
where he learned that the Allies had split their armies. Not only that, they were advancing at different speeds. The aggressive Blücher racing ahead, while the more cautious Schwarzenberg lagged behind. Leaving Oudinot and Victor to guard the Seine bridges and delay Schwarzenberg, Napoleon raced north through mud and rain with 30,000 men. The army of Silesia was strung out on the march, oblivious to the danger it was in. First, Napoleon fell on General Osufiev's Russian 9th Corps at Champaubert, destroying it, taking its commander and 2,000 men prisoner. The next morning, he marched on General Osten-Sacken's force near Montmiral. This was a much larger force, with 2 infantry and 1 cavalry corps, and was expecting support from York's Prussian 1st Corps. But the Prussians were late, and Sacken's troops could not withstand the French onslaught. At this desperate hour, the Emperor's elite Old Guard were no longer held back, but were often thrown into the thick of the fighting. By the end of the day, Napoleon had inflicted another 3,500 casualties, twice his own losses, and the Allies were in rapid retreat.
The French got
Napoleon had
plus
ordered
10
Marshal
points in
MacDonald to
defense.
cut off the enemy's escape by seizing the Marne Bridge at Chateau Thierry. But York's Prussians got there first. The next day, Napoleon could only batter their rear guard as the enemy fled across the Marne, destroying the bridge behind them. Sending Marshal Mortier to rebuild the bridge and continue the pursuit, Napoleon doubled back to rejoin Marmont, who had been left to keep watch on Blücher. Napoleon attacked at Vauchamp, using General Grouchy's cavalry to outflank Blücher's army, which was soon in headlong retreat. A merciless French pursuit inflicted 6,000 Prussian and Russian casualties. Napoleon lost just 600 men.
What?
Napoleon had taken on an enemy army almost twice his size, and beaten it 4 times in just 6 days. Blücher had lost an estimated 15,000 casualties in battle, and another 15,000 in smaller engagements, as stragglers or deserters.
Let's just look at the efficiency that Napoleon had. 600 to 3,000. Okay, this one is close, but okay. 500 to 2,700. My God. I mean, in Germany they followed the tactic of avoiding to fight Napoleon directly, but now you see why. Now you see why.
For now, the army of Silesia had been scattered and neutralized.
We all know that he was good, but that good.
But in the south, Marshals Victor and Oudinot had not been able to prevent Schwarzenberg's army of Bohemia from crossing the Seine in 3 places. Austrian troops were now just 40 miles from Paris.
Yeah, if Paris
leaving
falls,
Mortier and Marmont to keep watch on
over.
Blücher, Napoleon raced south. Schwarzenberg, alarmed by news of Blücher's defeat and of Napoleon's approach, immediately ordered a retreat. It was too late for Wittgenstein's advance guard, routed at Mormain with 2,000 casualties. Napoleon sent Victor's Second Corps to seize the bridge at Montereau, but was so infuriated by its slow progress that he sacked Victor and gave his corps to General Gérard. The next day, at the Battle of Montereau, the French drove the Allied Württemberg Corps back across the river, with 30% losses. According to some accounts, the Emperor sighted the French cannon himself, as he had at Lodi 18 years before.
There he is.
Napoleon had the Allies on the run. But how long could it last?
Yeah, the main objective of the Allies is to capture Paris, because Paris has the most population in France, is the political center, the economic center of France. Everything is in Paris, as most of the people know who know history and a little bit about France. So, and Napoleon knows that, so that's why he throws everything in front of Paris and to defend Paris. And if you're asking why isn't Wellington and the allies from Spain and Portugal advancing from the south? Well, there is a big mountain chain here, and there are only a few routes that the Allies could use to advance into France. And of course, with that, you as the defender only need a few troops to defend those 2, 3, 4, or whatever, those small portions where Allied troops could advance. But eventually, the British General Wellington will fight somewhere in southern France. I know that the Brits also fought in
negotiations between France and the
French
coalition
territory. Reopened
at Châtillon-sur-Seine on the 5th of February. The Allied terms were now more severe. A return to France's frontiers of 1791, which meant the additional loss of Belgium, a humiliation that Napoleon refused to accept. Instead, he tried to revive the Frankfurt proposals, hoping to play for time and to split the coalition, whose war aims varied from Britain's hard line to Austria's more ambiguous position. But this hope was thwarted by British Foreign Secretary Lord Castlereagh. On the 1st of March, he persuaded the Allies to sign the Treaty of Chaumont. In it, Russia, Prussia, Austria and Great Britain agreed to keep 150,000 troops in the field and not to negotiate separately with France, while Britain added the sweetener of a £5 million subsidy to be shared among the Allies. The treaty's secret articles specified common war aims, including the future independence of the German states, Switzerland and Italy, while Spain was to be returned to the Bourbons and Holland to the House of Orange.
Yeah, as you see, the Allies wanted to restore the order.
The four powers even agreed that once they'd defeated Napoleon, they'd form a 20-year defensive alliance to maintain peace in Europe, a sign of their newfound commitment to each other. A split in the coalition had been Napoleon's last best hope for a favourable peace.
Oh my god, that picture.
That was gone. And news from across the country was bleak. French cities were surrendering to the Allies without a fight. Nancy, Dijon and Mâcon had all fallen. In the south, Wellington defeated Marshal Soult at Orthez, forcing him to fall back on Toulouse. 2 weeks later, as British troops approached the city of Bordeaux, it declared loyalty to France's Bourbon kings. The mayor himself rode out to greet the British, bearing a white cockade, the sign of Bourbon allegiance.
Really?
Napoleon's hope for a nation in arms to resist the Allies
they also
had not materialized.
surrendered. Didn't know that.
Allied troops, particularly Cossacks, often robbed French civilians and committed some atrocities. French peasants took revenge when they could, but there was no guerrilla war to mirror what French troops had encountered in Spain or Russia. The chief desire among ordinary French people was for peace, at almost any price.
Yeah, I mean, they are, 20 years in war, now the war is coming to their house. They're paying huge taxes, all of their sons, nephews, young people are getting into the front,
Napoleon's
dying,
defeat
so
in late February
of course
was
they're
premature.
seeking peace.
The French Emperor was driving Schwarzenberg's army of Bohemia before him, even though it was twice his size. But Schwarzenberg scrambled to safety behind the River Aube. Napoleon knew he had to land another decisive blow soon, so turned his attention back to Blücher. After an aborted attempt to join forces with Schwarzenberg, Blücher had decided to resume his advance on Paris, gathering reinforcements en route, and with only Marmont and Mortier's weak corps to oppose him. Leaving Marshal MacDonald in command in the south, Napoleon set off to intercept Blücher, covering 60 miles in 3 days along terrible roads choked with mud. At Napoleon's approach, Blücher retreated across the Marne, burning the bridges behind him. 24 hours later, they'd been rebuilt by French engineers, and Napoleon was poised to crush Blücher against the Aisne River, because the major crossing point at Soissons was held by a Franco-Polish garrison. But after just a day's fighting, the garrison commander at Soissons tamely surrendered, allowing Blücher to escape. Napoleon continued his pursuit across the Aisne, still hoping to cut off the army of Silesia. But at Craon, he encountered Russian troops in a strong defensive position. The Russians fought stubbornly. The French finally forced the enemy to withdraw, but only at the cost of 6,000 casualties, including many irreplaceable veterans from Napoleon's guard. Napoleon pushed on to Laon. But by now, Blücher had concentrated his forces, 98,000 troops in all, and outnumbered Napoleon 2-1. French attacks were repulsed, while Marmont's corps was caught off guard by a late Allied counterattack and routed. Napoleon was lucky to avoid a much heavier defeat. Blücher, usually aggressive to the point of recklessness, was unwell and had been told Napoleon's army was twice as big as it was, leading him to act with unusual caution.
Maybe he could have
was a heavy
crushed
blow
Napoleon
to
right
Napoleon.
there.
6,500 casualties he could not afford. Undaunted, he fell back to Soissons, and after a brief moment to reorganize, he marched on the city of Reims, which had just fallen to Saint-Priest's Russian corps. In a whirlwind assault, Napoleon retook the city. Saint-Priest himself was mortally wounded, his corps routed. Meanwhile, in the south, Schwarzenberg had resumed his offensive as soon as he found out Napoleon had gone north.
Just imagine the marches that the French troops had. He was, somewhere around here, then he chased Bluchner up here, then he's taking that, then he's probably going to go back to defend somewhere around here. I mean, how are those troops even fighting when they're fighting? Meaning the French.
In heavy fighting, he'd driven Oudinot and MacDonald back from the River Aube. 5 days later, the Allies had recaptured Troyes, as MacDonald retreated behind the River Seine. Now, after 4 days to rest and reorganize his battered army, Napoleon was coming south once more.
Just look at those marches.
Schwarzenberg, emboldened by news of Napoleon's defeat at Laon, decided that this time he would stand and fight. Napoleon advanced on Arcis-sur-Aube, ignoring reports that the enemy was not retreating as he believed, but gathering for battle. As heavy fighting broke out, Napoleon still believed he faced only the enemy rearguard. It was a nasty surprise to discover that he faced the entire might of the army of Bohemia. 28,000 men against 80,000. In desperate fighting, Napoleon personally rallied fleeing troops and exposed himself to enemy fire, having his horse killed under him by an exploding shell. But the odds were too great. At the end of the second day, Napoleon was forced to order the retreat.
Yeah, if the emperor needs to go down from his horse to rally the troops and to save the situation and to go full front into the front, that's definitely a bad sign. That's definitely a bad sign.
Napoleon believed his army was now too weak to take on the Allies directly, so he decided to change strategy. He would march into the rear of the Allied armies, join up with some of his isolated garrisons, and cut the enemy's lines of communication, forcing them to abandon their advance on Paris.
Yeah, but then they could just advance to Paris if he leaves that undefended.
Until now always one step behind Napoleon, had just received crucial information. Talleyrand, the most brilliant French diplomat of the age, and the most slippery. He'd served France's monarchy, the Revolution, then Napoleon, until in 1807 he fell out irrevocably with the Emperor over foreign policy. He now believed that Napoleon was dragging France into ruin, and worked behind the scenes to ensure his downfall.
And Talleyrand will be one of the French guys who will be the deputies after Napoleon is sent to Elba to negotiate peace treaties in Europe with Metternich and other
From Paris,
diplomats.
He wrote to the Russian Emperor Alexander at Allied headquarters, informing him that in the capital, support for Napoleon was crumbling, and the city's defences had been completely neglected. He urged the Allies to march immediately on Paris, without allowing Napoleon to distract them. Talleyrand's information was confirmed when the Allies intercepted a report from Napoleon's chief of police, General Savary, meant for the Emperor. The treasury, arsenals and powder stores are empty. We are completely at the end of our resources. The population is discouraged and discontented, wishing peace at any price. As Napoleon advanced on Saint-Dizier,
he's starting to
the
lose
Allies
the home
sent
front
General
also.
Witzengerode and 10,000 cavalry to harass his army and to screen their own movements. Then began their march on Paris. At Fère-Champenoise, they collided with Marmont and Mortier's corps, advancing to join Napoleon. An entire National Guard division, 5,000 men, was virtually wiped out as the marshals suffered a crushing defeat.
Wow!
Napoleon feared that the fall of Paris would be a fatal blow to his regime. His political authority and ability to wage war might not recover.
Of course, if he loses
So, when he
Paris, he
received
loses
news
everything.
of the Allies' movements, he tore up his plans and ordered a forced march back to Paris, intending to lead its defense in person.
Just think about the troops, the
Napoleon's
French
wife
troops.
and son were evacuated from the capital, along with most of his ministers. His brother, Joseph, the ex-king of Spain, was in charge of the city's defences, but had done little. Paris was awash with rumours of treachery and defeat. Marmont and Mortier were able to reach Paris before the Allies, adding their troops to the garrison. It now totaled 37,000 men, including some hardened veterans of the Guard, but many more young conscripts, while a third were part-time soldiers of the National Guard.
What did the Allies have, like
The Allies had
200,000?
120,000 seasoned
120,
troops
okay.
outside the city. And given the urgency of taking Paris before Napoleon could intervene, their elite guards and grenadier divisions would lead the way. On the 30th of March, they began their assault from the north. Heavy fighting raged throughout the day. The city's defenders fought bravely, inflicting several thousand casualties on the advancing enemy. But defeat was inevitable. That night, to save Paris from destruction, Marshal Marmont agreed to surrender the city, on condition the garrison was permitted to leave with its weapons.
What, and the Allies accepted that?
At the Hôtel des Invalides, the 71-year-old Marshal Serrurier oversaw the burning of 1,400 flags and standards captured from France's enemies, as well as Frederick the Great's sword and sash, so they would not fall into Allied hands.
No! No! They didn't do that! What? Really? Frederick
The
the
burning
Great...
of 1,400 flags and standards captured from France's enemies, as well as Frederick the Great's sword and sash.
No! They didn't do... Bastards! I don't know about you. I'm very sensitive about historical buildings, historical artifacts, monuments, whatever. When somebody destroys something, whatever the cause may be, you know, like they're going to retake our city and then they're going to retake the monuments, whatever. I don't care. Give it to them. Don't destroy it. It's a historical artifact. I mean, okay, it wasn't too many years after Frederick, you know, like at that time, but imagine having that today. I was so furious. I don't know why I'm now thinking about that, but there was a mosque. I think it was the third or fourth oldest mosque in the world, somewhere in the Middle East, and the ISIS group detonated the mosque. And it was a pretty one, you know, like, and it blew up. And the mosque was, I don't know how long, for 1,000 years or something like that. It was, I hate that. I hate that. Give it to them. God, I hate it. It always tilts me.
Hands.
It always tilts me.
Napoleon was just 15 miles from Paris when he was informed of the city's surrender. He sat with his head in his hands for 15 minutes.
Yeah, now he lost. Politically he lost. Economically he lost. Regarding the manpower he also lost. Losing Paris
on the 31st of March
everything.
1814, France's enemies marched into Paris for the first time since the 100 Years' War. Parisian crowds cheered the three Allied monarchs, bringers of peace. Everyone in Paris was suddenly a royalist once more. Above all, they cheered for Emperor Alexander of Russia, now hailed as Europe's saviour.
Yeah, not only in France, everywhere throughout Europe.
Don Cossacks bivouacked on the Champs-Élysées. Allied troops generally behaved well.
Generally behaved well.
35 miles away, Napoleon was at Fontainebleau with 36,000 men, all of them hungry and exhausted after their 100-mile forced march. Nevertheless, Napoleon began planning an immediate advance on Paris. But for the first time, he faced unanimous opposition from his ministers and marshals, including Ney, MacDonald, Oudinot, and Berthier. They reminded him of his oath to act for the good of France. He accused them of disloyalty, acting only to save themselves. They told him the war was lost, and he must abdicate in favour of his son if possible. On the 4th of April, Marshal Marmont surrendered his entire corps to the coalition, which was marched over to the enemy lines against the wishes of many of its officers and men.
Really?
This was a devastating blow to Napoleon, and encouraged the Allies to reject his offer of a conditional abdication in favour of his son. 2 days later, he abdicated without conditions. The Allied powers having proclaimed that the Emperor Napoleon is the only obstacle to the re-establishment of peace in Europe, the Emperor Napoleon, faithful to his oath, declares that he renounces for himself and his heirs the thrones of France and Italy, and that there is no personal sacrifice, including his life, that he is not ready to make in the interests of France. Napoleon's abdication was formalized by the Treaty of Fontainebleau, by which he was allowed to keep the title of emperor, become sovereign of the small island of Elba, and retain a bodyguard of 400 men.
Yeah, but I didn't know that that his wife and his son weren't allowed to go with him to Elba. Maybe they were allowed, but they didn't want to come, or he didn't want them to come. If you have some info on that, let me know.
News came too late to prevent Wellington's attack on Toulouse, leading to a costly and pointless battle, with more than 7,000 casualties. The night after his abdication, Napoleon tried to commit suicide, using the poison that had been made for him in Russia in case of capture. But it had lost its potency, and he survived. 2 weeks later, Napoleon bade farewell to his old guard at Fontainebleau Palace, and began his journey into exile. The Napoleonic Wars, which had raged on land and sea for 11 years, seemed finally at an end.
But
the death toll is unknown, but historians estimate that 2 to 3 million lives were lost across Europe. Most soldiers died not in battle, but from disease. Many thousands were left maimed and disfigured.
And also take into account the economy of Europe, of all the different European countries, the economic hit on that. The continental blockade, all the time, everything is... It's a state of total war where everything is pulled into the war effort.
This period, Napoleon was master of Europe, imposing treaties on humbled enemies, redrawing frontiers, overthrowing old regimes, and making new kings. He was the last figure in history to combine total political power with frontline military genius, in the mold of Alexander and Caesar. But it seemed Napoleon's reign was to end in abject military defeat. However, Exile on Elba did not prove to Napoleon's taste. In less than 10 months, he would return to France to fight one last great campaign to reclaim his throne.
I love epic history TV's videos. I love them. I love them. They're so great. Yeah, he will return for another 100 days to try to reinstate his power. And then we're gonna go into the Battle of Waterloo. We have only one video left, and I think it's also called the Battle of Waterloo. And then we're going to take on another series. I was thinking about just maybe to put a poll. I got a lot of suggestions in the comment section in prior videos, not only under the Napoleonic War ones, but others also. Some suggestions on some series, and I was thinking about maybe putting a poll in the comment section, and then you guys can decide which ones we're going to take on. Okay, we have only one video left. I'm kind of sad because, you know, like when you're so into one topic for such a long time, it's like watching a series, you know, like when a good series that you really like, and then when it's over, you're like, you know, like you're not realizing that it's truly over, that, you know, like new episodes aren't coming out, that the story is done, the story has been told. But okay, hope that you enjoyed it. If you want to join, just hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. And until the next time, see ya.